All right, what we're gonna do is a little wall destruction today. Um, Made a bunch of bricks, arranged them in a brick pattern. Decided I want to hit this section right here with a boulder, and I sort of grouped those into a separate group, and then the rest of them. And the impact bricks, as I call them, are the ones that have already been shattered, so that they actually break. So as you can see, if I pull this out, I have a piece of brick right here, and I have put a sort of texture on the inside for that. So I'm going to show you how I shatter the bricks, and then we'll go into the actual dynamics. I'm just going to grab an unshattered brick like this one, and I'm just going to duplicate it off here just to show you how I do that. So if I go under the FX menu, go to Effects, open up Shatter, go into Settings here, and I'm just going to reset things here. So what we're going to do here is set original surface. We're going to hide the original surface. And then we're going to make sure triangulate surface is on. And what we're going to do here is say how many pieces we want. So if we want 5 pieces, edge jagginess, I'm going to go like 0.75 so that it actually makes the edges jagged. And then you have a different seed value here just to give you different shapes. And we also want to apply interior material. So the interior faces are going to get actually given a new shader. So let's make two bricks here. Actually, let's go ahead and do 3 of them, just so we have a little wall pattern here. Okay. The first thing I want to do is, when I have them where I want to first freeze transformations and then also delete history. So edit, delete by type, history. Okay, just to keep them nice and clean. So I'm going to start with this first brick here. After I've set everything, I'm just going to hit apply, and it's going to shatter into 5 pieces. And this is what that looks like. And you see that now we have this yellow shader on the inside. Okay, and it's made a new yellow shader. So if I go into the hypershade, give it a second to pop up here somewhere. Okay, so here's our hypershade. You see there's a shatter interior S1 material. Okay, now if we go, so I'm going to undo moving this brick out of this piece out of here. Let's see. Did I lose my undos? Okay, I'm just going to put it back here. I think I should be able to just zero it back out. Yeah. Okay. Then if we use the exact same settings to shatter the next brick, you're going to see that they're basically, oh, that happened. There we go. You're going to see it does the exact same shatter, right? So what we need to do is just make sure we change this. I'm going to undo back here to before we shattered this one. Right, and this time I'm going to just change the seed value. And now if I hit apply here, it's going to give me different shapes. And it's similar, right? So you gotta experiment. You can see it's not the exact same shape, but it's similar in some of the pieces. But okay, so there we go. Now, if we do another one, let's say we go down to 4, and we do another seed value and apply that. Okay, then we'll get another shatter here. Okay. The thing that we need to be aware of is that for every one of these, now there we go. Every time you do a shatter, it makes a new shader. So we need to basically consolidate that down. So what we're going to do, I'm actually going to just select these and Control-1 to isolate them, just to hide everything else. And I'm going to go to shading and X-ray, and you can see those interior faces right there. So here's my interior brick shader, right? If I graph this, it's a procedural shader with a fractal as the sort of concrete noise kind of thing. So what I need to do is right click on one of these, go to select objects with material, and you see it's selected these faces. Then I can come to my interior brick, right click, and go to assign material to viewport selection. So it replaces that yellow shader with this one. And I'm just going to do it with all 3 of these. So select objects with material and then assign this one, and do it for the last one. Select objects and then assign my interior brick. Okay, so now they all have this interior brick shader now. And if I turn off X-ray, you see that they're not yellow anymore. Okay, so that's how you would get rid of these, right? Because you need to have The interior faces have your interior shader, and then the exterior faces can have whatever exterior shader that you wanted to put on there. Okay, so now that that's done, you can zero this out. Oops. Okay, so we're done with the shadowing here, and it creates a group and everything. So we actually don't need these now because that was just a demonstration about how I got to what I have right here. Okay, so if I go shading and go to X-ray, you'll see that all the ones that are going to actually break have that shader, and then the ones that aren't are just solid. Okay, so that's how we're going to do it. Just we're going to group the two sets of them, right? So the ones where the impact's going to happen, the ones that are going to break are grouped, and then the rest of the wall is just in a different group. So we're going to treat these as two different rigid body sets. Okay, now we need to go back to FX, and we need to make sure Bullet is on. So under Windows, Settings, Preferences, Plugin Manager, we need to turn on Bullet. So if you, easy way to get to it, if it's not, just type in Bullet, and then just make sure that these are both active, and then you will have that menu item. All right. So Bullet, just a quick run through a Bullet here. You can, so if I select one, let's make a copy of this guy here and just freeze transformations on it. So we have this brick here. If we go to Bullet, and let's save my file here, go to Bullet, I'm going to set it to an active rigid body. Let's open this up, and I'm just going to reset the settings. Now typically the only thing I want to change in here, and the reason I only change this one thing, is because these settings here I would want to set later anyway. And if I adjust things now, then everything else is going to have those settings. I'd rather just do it on the individual things. But collider shape, we're just going to use hull because that's going to give us the best shape for collision. Box would work for a brick, but anything that's not a box, the box colliders is not going to do very well. So generally hull is the best way to go. Okay, so that's the only thing I want to change there. And I'm going to hit apply and close. Now we have a bullet solver right here. And if we go in the attribute editor, we are going to turn on ground plane. That's just going to use the My Grid as a ground plane. The other thing you could do is just make a ground plane and have that be a collider. But this will work. So if I hit play now, it's just going to fall down as you would expect. Okay, and to go into the settings for that, just select it, go into bullet rigid body shape. If you want to increase the mass, there's linear damping, angular damping. So you want to angle the spin of it, you want to angle the movement of it, the friction, and so on and so forth. And again, if you did not change the setting to hull in the when you first made it, you can always just change it here. Okay, so it's pretty straightforward how that works. Just select the thing, you can make it a dynamic rigid body. The other thing you can do is, if I'm just going to make a duplicate here, and I'm just going to scale this guy up, make it a little bigger, put it right below the other one, right, so that they will collide. So that one was an active rigid body, meaning it's going to be moving. Let's freeze transforms on this guy. This one, I'm going to make a passive rigid body. And again, same thing, I just make it hull and hit apply and close. So this one is passive, meaning that it itself does not move, but it can collide. Other things can collide with it without it getting affected by that. So if I rewind here and play, okay, that didn't work right. Let's try that again. All right, so sometimes this happens. And the reason this happens is that there's a thing with Bullet that sometimes it does not put the collision shape, that hull, around the geometry. It's sort of off somewhere else. So if you click on the Bullet solver and turn on collision shape, you'll see that my passive collider, the collision shape is way over here. And that's just I'm not sure why Bullet does this. So it's way over here when it should be around this, because that is the thing that is going to collide with the active rigid body. Notice that the active rigid body is, the collider shape is correct. It's around that brick. But for the passive rigid body, it's way over here. So who knows why that is? If I click on that passive rigid body and go back to rigid body shape here, center of mass, just set this to 0. Set all of them to 0. And you might have to hit the rewind button here to actually see it update. Now with the center of mass set to 0, the collision shape is in the right spot. So if I play it back now, you'll see that it does collide. Okay, so yeah, again, that's just a thing with bullet. Not sure why that happens. It doesn't always happen. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But now you can see it actually just lands on there like you would expect. And I believe you can, rotate this, and there we go. It'll fall. Okay, so now that's your static and active rigid bodies. So we're just gonna select these two. I'm gonna go to bullet, and I'm gonna go to remove bullet from selection. Or maybe I need to do it one at a time here. Let's see, remove bullet. There we go. Bullet, remove bullet from selection. That one doesn't. Let's see, is it still falling? Yeah, it's still falling. Maybe I need to do it at its rest pose. If not, I'm just gonna delete them anyway. No big deal. Okay, now the way we're gonna do this is we need to turn all these bricks into rigid bodies, but we don't want to have to select them one by one and do them. And then have different settings, right? Because I only have, I don't know, I have a few hundred bricks here, or maybe like 100 and something. And I would have about 100 and something different settings to mess with. So rather than do that, because I have them in two distinct groups here, the impact bricks and the rest of the wall bricks, I'm going to do what's called a rigid set. So basically it puts them under one rigid node. And when you change the settings, it applies to all the bricks. Okay, so for these, what I'm going to do is just go to bullet. We're going to go to rigid set. Just click on that. Okay, did that work? Yep. So now what we have here is we actually have, when I isolate this is a single object now that is called wall brick set solved, which is basically the object that's going to be used for all the dynamics. Okay, so, and we have the wall brick set right here. To go into the settings for that, we need to go into the bullet solver, go to the third tab here, and we got rigid attributes, initial conditions, and collision attributes. Notice that the collision shape here is defaulted to box, and watch what happens if I play this back. They're just going to fall apart. Okay, now the reason there's two sets of bricks here is because remember there's the wall brick set solved. That's the one that the dynamics are on. And then we have our wall bricks here, which is the original one. So I can actually hide the original ones. Okay. And you can see that just standing there, things fall apart. That's because the collision shape is not the best, right? Even though it is a box and bricks are boxes, it's generally not the best here. So what I'm going to do is go back in here and there, and we're going to set this to hull. And there might still be some movement, right? If we play it. Now they're kind of exploding, but that's okay. What we're going to do is tell it to be initially sleeping. So if I rewind it and play, nothing happens until some kind of physics bumps into them. Then we're going to turn on glue shapes. And what this is, they got a glue breaking threshold, which allows those bricks to stick together until a certain amount of force that is greater than the glue breaking threshold is applied, and they will actually split apart. So the bricks where the impact is not very high will sort of stick together, whereas the ones where there's higher impact might break apart. Okay, so now we'll do the same with the impact bricks here, and that's all the little pieces that we had in there, right? So all those solid shatters and what have you in there. So what we're going to do is go to bullet, and we're going to go to rigid set. Okay, and then we're going to hide that group. And now we have the impact bricks right here. Same thing. We're going to go into the bullet solver. Go to the, let's see here, impact bricks, set initial state. And, if you want them to weigh a little bit more, so, you can set that and whatnot. Typically, I will want to increase a little bit, maybe 0.25 for the angular and the linear damping. I'm going to turn the friction all the way up. I'm going to set those to initially sleeping, turn on glue shapes. Okay, and we might actually go back to the other ones and set the glue shape to something a little bit higher. Okay, and then these ones as well will be set to hull. Okay, now if we did that correctly, we should be able to just play this and nothing moves, just like we want. Perfect. Okay, now what we can do is just going to make our boulder here. I'm going to turn on wireframe. So I know I want this boulder to hit somewhere in this region. So I'm going to move it up here and then move it back, something like that. Okay, delete history and freeze transformations on it. That's very important with bullet. And then we're going to go in the bullet solver and we're just going to make sure that our collision shapes are correct. And in this case, they are. You can see all the collision shapes are where they need to be. Okay, so I'm going to turn that back off. Select this, maybe make it a little bit bigger. Freeze it again. And what I'm going to do now is go to bullet. Now this one's going to be just a single active rigid body because there's only one of it. So I'm going to go in there. It should be set to hull. And the mass right now is set to 1, which is the same as the bricks. And first of all, if I play it back right now, it's just going to fall straight down. So what we need to do is go into initial conditions on this guy. And we're going to give it initial velocity, right? So in my case, we needed to go in the negative x. So the red arrow is the x-axis. We need to go in the negative x direction. So here, I'm just going to put a negative number. So like negative 10 or something like that. All right, so if we play it back, and they blow up a lot. So we need to go a little higher. So negative 20. And what we need, maybe some linear damping and some angular damping a little bit there. And what we need to also do, we could also give it some rotation here. So, I don't know, 300, 250, whatever, right? Could be anything in there. And it should then have an initial spin. But notice how it sort of bounces off, right? What we want is for it to go through. So I'm going to turn this mass up, say something like 10, and run it again. That's still not enough. Let's go to 30 and let's give it more speed. So negative 40. Right. So, and there we go. So it goes through the wall. Notice how some of these stick together until they encounter a force big enough to split them up. Okay. So that is our simulation right here. Let's turn the wireframe off. And there we go. So if we come in real close here and look at the bricks here, you can see that the little pieces have come apart. They've sort of fallen all over the place, right? So if I want, I can also just sort of go to negative 35 if I don't want it to be that violent, right? And let's play that. Okay, so that's what we got. So let's say we're happy with that. Okay. So now what we want to do now, one thing I did forget to do was put a different shader on the outside brick. So I'm just going to go in here and we're just going to make just a new standard surface. So tab AI standard surface. And I'm just going to give this, so we'll just call this brick. Okay, and set this to whatever color, some kind of reddish brick color, something like that. Maybe less saturation. Okay. So right now the bricks all have the basically this shader. So if I go to select objects in initial shading group, that's the standard surface, right? So I'm just going to apply this material to that selection. Right. Now you may not be able to see it here because we're using the pre-solved thing. Oh, there we go. Just had to rewind it. Now that has applied it to this guy. So this guy I'm just going to reapply, or if I had a different shader, I'm just going to reapply standard surface 1 because I don't need him to have that. Okay. So now the bricks have that red color, but the inside of the bricks is that other shader which we want. Okay, so now that we have our simulation, we want to think about how to make the dust. And the thing about it is we only want to emit the dust from this shader and not from the brown shader. Okay, because otherwise everything will just be emitting dust and it won't look very convincing. We want it to come mainly from the broken pieces. Okay, so that's what we're going to do, and we're going to use Bifrost for that. All right, so we are going to go to Windows, Bifrost Graph Editor, and here's our graph editor right here. So I'm going to just reset my simulation here. So the nice thing about Bullet is that it has now created two single objects, right? Before we had a whole bunch of single bricks, and to bring those all in here, you'd have a lot of sort of brick nodes. But now we basically have broken it down to two nodes. We have this one and that one, which is really nice. So if I just go to create graph here with nothing selected and then middle mouse drag each of these in here, there's the first one, there's the impact bricks right there. So now they are part of the graph. Now it's important to understand that the way the Bifrost simulator works is that it actually emits smoke or dust or whatever from the vertices, not necessarily the faces. So what we want is, again, if I play this, what we want is to tell it that the vertices that have this shader on are the ones that we want to emit the dust from, and the vertices that have the brown shader on, we don't want to emit dust from. So that's what we're going to do here. So first, we're going to open this up here, or maximize it, I should say. I'm going to take my input and move it all the way over here. Just get these we don't need the input. We don't need this input. We just, these two are inputs and that's our output. So we have to basically do something with the vertices to mark them for emission, because Bifrost actually does not support emitting from vertices that have a specific shader. So technically speaking, we can't really use the shaders to do this. So what we have to do is use vertex colors. And what vertex colors are is we can store color information on the vertices themselves. This is separate from shaders. It's like in ZBrush. If you use ZBrush and you polypaint, you're actually polypainting on the vertex colors, not on a shader. So we need to basically, all the vertices that have this shader need to be one color. And then all the rest of the ones that have the brown shader need to be a separate color. And then we can use that to decide which ones emit. So I'm going to bring back the hyper shade right here. So right here we have, this is our interior brick and this is the actual exterior brick. So what I'm going to first start doing is right click on the interior brick and select objects with material. And you'll see that it selects all the faces that have that interior brick shader. And I'm going to go back here to modeling. I'm going to go to mesh display. And I'm going to go to apply color, open up the options. And here I'm going to set this color to white. So here it says color. You just set it to white and we want it to replace the color and then hit apply. Okay. Now you're probably not going to see anything here in the viewport. Okay. You're not going to really see anything, but just know that it did actually work. Sometimes it will show you. I'm not sure how to turn off the shaders and just show the vertex colors. I'm sure there is a way. I'm not entirely sure how to do that. So we know now that the vertices with that shader are now white. And, I'm going to make a new, let's make a new object here. Let's just start with a sphere and just move it over here. Okay. So essentially, I think it'll work if I do it this way. If I go to here and apply that, you can see that it applies white there. And if I hold shift and drag over the whole thing and then set this to black, it's going to apply black there. So that is your vertex colors. Okay. Because we have shaders on here, it's not really showing up. But if, when you have the default shader, it will show up. So that's basically what we're doing. We're just applying a certain color to some vertices and another color to others. So that's what we're doing here. So now what I'm going to do is select the brick color. So select objects with material, and it's going to select everything else. And now we're going to apply black to that. So hit apply. And again, we don't see it, but it is actually doing that. Okay, just give it a second. It might have to think. Okay, so there we go. So yeah, you can't see it, but that has actually happened, and we'll verify later in the process. Okay, so now let's go back here to our graph right here. And really the one that we want is this one, the impact bricks, right? That central region. So we have to get those vertex colors from our impact bricks. So we're going to use a get geo property. So tab and get geo, and we want get geo property. Okay, so this is what we want. And the property we want, now if we select one of these impact bricks, and we go to mesh display and we go to, where is it, color set editor, you'll see that there's a color set, right? Those vertex colors are stored in what's called a color set, and it's called color set 1, and it's got 4 channels, the RGB and then the alpha channel. So it's 4 channels. So it's called color set 1, and that's what we want. So that's the property we're looking for here. So we go to, and we have to spell it exactly the same way. So capital S1, so color set 1. That's the property we want. And you'll see it says get geo color set 1. So we're going to take this mesh and plug it into geometry. Okay. Now, there's one thing that we have to do, and if you don't do this, the whole thing's not going to work. And this is type. If you right-click on type and go to value types, you need to set this to math float 4. By default, it's a math float 3. But if you remember, there's 4 channels. There's the red, green, blue, and then the alpha channel. That's 4 channels. So we need to set this to float 4. Okay. This literally took me forever to figure out. You know, if you don't set this, it's just not going to work, and you're not going to know why, even though you might have set everything else up correctly. So we set that to math float 4. So it'll take those 4 channels, and now we can get to the data that we want. Okay, so from there, now we have pulled out the color set data. And the data that we get out of here, we need to convert it to scalar values. So instead of a vector value, which is the RGBA, right? It's a 4-part value. We need to convert this into the individual parts. So what we're going to do is tab here and go to, just type VTS for vector to scalar, and we know that we're coming in with 4 values, so it's got to be vector 4 to scalar. So we take the data, we'll plug it into vector 4, and it's just going to split those out into their individual channels. So this would be the R, the G, the B, and then the alpha would be right here. Okay. Now, the reason that we use white and black is because to get pure white, your RGB values are the same. So they're basically RGB 1, 1, and 1. So really, we don't need all 3. We just need one of them. And to get black, the RGB values is 0, 0, and 0, right? So we're just going to need one of these here. So the next one is called a find all in array. So find all in array. And we're just going to take the X value and plug it into array here. And then in here, the value that we want is is white, which the RGB value for white is 1. So we're going to set the value here to 1. Okay, so find all 1 in array, meaning that all the white in the array is going to be, so any vertex that the vertex color on that vertex is white is going to be collected, and all the ones that aren't white are not going to be included. Okay, then the next one we want is tab. We want get from array. Okay, so we're gonna take this, and what this is doing basically, in that array of vertices, right? It pulls all the vertices out, and there's an array of vertices, and it'll only record the indices in that array of the ones that are white. So we're going to plug this in the index. Okay, so that array of points, the ones that are the RGB value set to white, it's going to save those ones, and the ones where it's set to black, it's going to ignore. So now we have all the indices for the points that are white and none of the points that are black. So now what we can do is come over here and do a get point position. So GPP and get point position. I'm going to take this geometry, and what that does is it pulls all the points out of that mesh and puts them into an array of point positions. And then we're going to take that array and plug it into this array. So now we have all the points in an array and their positions, which is now being plugged into this array, and then we're telling it to only use the ones where the value is white. So now it's going to give us an array of just the points of all the point positions of the vertices that are white. Okay, so there we go, and then we just have to use that to construct some particles or points that we can emit our dust from. So for that, we go to construct points. So construct points. Oops. And we're going to plug this into here. So now it's created some separate points just on the vertices that are white. Okay. Then we need to tell, what shape are those points. So we go to tab, set point shape. Right here. So we're going to take those points in here. And what this node does here, it allows you to set a specific shape to your points. So by default, it's a disk. What we want is a sphere. Okay, we want those points to be spheres. Okay, and then we can mess with the default size. We'll do that once we get back to the viewport here in a minute. Okay, so for now, we're just going to output those points. So we're going to take out points and go to output. And let's see what we got. Okay, so let's rewind. And I'm just going to play it back here. And let's stop it. Okay, so if we're not seeing anything here, then something must be off here. So let me see what we got. Okay, so I see my mistake. I used the wall bricks instead of the impact bricks. That's why it's not showing anything, because the wall bricks are all black. So that makes sense. So that's my fault. I'm just going to go drag this mesh into there and this one into here, right? So, sorry about that. Let's look at it now. There we go. You can see you got these really big points or particles on there. So here I set point shape. We're going to set these to like a point. Let's try 0.1. There we go. So you can see what we got here, that the brown side of the brick doesn't have any points, but the part of the brick that does have that shader. Let's go even lower here. Let's go 0.05. Oops. 0.05. There we go. Okay, if I turn on wireframe, you'll see that every vertex on the part that has this shader, every vertex has now a particle, a little sphere around it. And then the ones that don't have that, like this, they don't have any particles. Okay, so that's a little thing that we have to do, just because Bifrost does not allow you to use a map to, signify where the smoke is emitted. So we have to sort of do a workaround here for that. And just so where I got this from. This is from this. It's on the Autodesk forums. How do we emit smoke from selected points using Bifrost? So this is the solution that I found to be able to do this. The only thing that I had to change was, I guess this was an older version of Bifrost, so they were using a vector 3 to scaler. So I guess they didn't have to do the 4 values in the type like we had to do. And I tried it this way and it would not work. And that was because I needed to switch this to 4, and this would have been a vector 4 to scalar instead of and then you would have had 4 values here. So that's the thing that I had to change to get it to work in my version. So just be aware of that. Okay, so now we have what we want. We have these points here that are just on that shader and not on the brown shader. And that's what we need to happen here, right? And at any point, if you go back in here and change the vertex colors, it's going to update to whatever the vertex color is. Now, it's important that the vertex colors can be anything but white and black. And the reason for that is basically back here using the value of 1. So white is a value of 1, black is a value of 0 in the RGBs. If you are looking for like a purple or red or whatever, red, you can do that if you only use the red channel. Because red will be 1 and everything else will be 0. But if you plugged in the yellow channel, the green channel, that wouldn't work. Or if you had a color that had 3 values, then now you're looking for 3 values instead of just the one. Okay, so you'd have to adjust this for whatever value you try to go for. But if you just do it white and black, it makes it easy because either you're emitting dust or you're not, right? It's a binary thing. It's 2 values. So using just black and white, which is 0 and 1, works a lot better. All right, so now we have this part of it working. Okay, so now we can use these points to emit the dust, right? Those points that are on the vertices can now be used to emit our dust. So the way we're going to do that, I'm just going to break this connection right here and tab and go to basic aerograph right here, and then right click on that and explode it. So here we go. So these out points are now going to go into the geometry. Okay, and then the arrow volume, I'm going to tab and we're going to go to assign material. Okay, so and then that's going to go to out geometry. No, don't plug it in out points. In fact, I'm just going to delete the out points port. And right here, volume material, just right click, go to create node, and just going to do a standard Arnold volume material. And we're just going to leave that as is for right now. And here are some things we're going to do here. So in the source air node, I'm going to turn on use fluid detail size just so that these values become linked. So I'm going to turn this, I'm going to cut this in half. So 0.025. And the reason I'm going to cut it in half is because I'm going to scale the whole simulation down in half. So if I click on the arrow solver settings, I'm going to set the scene units to 0.5. Okay, that just makes, instead of each grid square being 1 meter, right, this is 1 meter by 1 meter. Now it's about a half a meter by a half meter, which honestly is still pretty large here. But in fact, you know, let's go ahead and go even lower here. Where's simulation scale? Let's go 0.25. Which means then we need to go back in source air and let's just go to 0.1 here. 0.01, sorry, in the fluid detail size. Okay, so now these are 1/4 of a meter, which again, if these are bricks, that's still pretty big, but it should be okay. Then what else do we have to do here? Now notice that those points are not visible anymore. That's because they're no longer plugged into the output, but they're still there and they will emit smoke or dust. Then the other thing we want to do is tab and put a dissipation influence, right? We don't want this dust to last forever. We want it to emit and then sort of die off. So I'll plug that into influences, and I'm going to set my dissipation influence rate to maybe, let's try 2.5. So 2.5. Okay. What else do we want here? If we go in the solver settings here, we're going to set the style to, let's try wispy, because dust is more wispy. Yeah, let's start with that and see what we got. Okay, so with all this connected, remember you have to be connected to the output to see the smoke or dust. And let's rewind our simulations, go back to the beginning, and save your file, right? Anytime you go to simulate, I would always just hit Control S to save and give it a sec. And then we can run the simulation. And that's taking a minute to save here, but we'll give it some time. Okay, I'm going to turn my wireframe off here. And I'm just going to let this run. So let's hit play. And you can see it's already started emitting smoke, but that's all right. We need it's about frame 10 that it hit, but now we could see what we're getting here. Now, keep in mind, this is running 2 simulations at once, right? It's running the bullet simulation and the dust simulation at the same time. So it might be a little slow. But you can see now, if you look at that piece there, it's emitting the dust just from those white faces, and notice that the brown side of it is not, right? And notice that these right here are not emitting either. Okay, so I'm gonna hit escape here to stop it, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna play blast it. Now, one thing that we do want to do, if I remember, it hit somewhere around this boulder sort of got to the wall somewhere around frame 10. So if I go in here and go to source air, we can tell it to start. Let's go 11. Okay, so I'm going to say around frame 11. That's where I want it to start emitting the dust. Okay, so let's go in here. I'm going to rewind it, and I will pause the video right now and do a play blast, and then I will get back when that is done. See you in a bit. Okay, so this is test number 1 here. If we play this back, you see what we get. I did up the dissipation rate, but you can see this, it gets to a point where it's not looking very good at all. Right in there. So, I'm gonna go through some settings here and adjust until I get something that looks good. The emission. Other than that, the emission of the dust from the parts from the pieces is good. So we're just gonna go into our Bifrost graph here and start adjusting stuff. So one thing I'm gonna do is just go back in the solver settings. Wispy doesn't look that good. We can try busy, right? You got the default, you got fluffy, you got busy. We're gonna try busy. They all look slightly different. You just gotta run a simulation and check them out and see. Like I said, I did increase this to 3.5. I think I'm gonna go back to 2.5. Then what I'm also gonna do is I'm gonna tab in here and do a turbulence influence. And I'm gonna take this and put it into the influences, right? Just plug it into influences. It's going to keep adding in out influence here. But then into this, if I open up here, what I want to do is use an actual turbulence field, right, for this. So I'm going to tab in here, and we want a fractal turbulence field right here. Okay, so this noise field is going to go into turbulence, but we want to actually be able to control things here. So we're going to go to tab and do a time, because we want this field to change over time. So we're gonna use the seconds to adjust the time. But before we do that, we're going to add a multiplier node. So tab and multiply. We're going to take our seconds, plug them in there. We're going to take the output and plug it into time. And then here next to this plus, we're going to right click and create a value node. And we're going to set this value to 1. At least for now, right? So what this is going to do is it's going to take whatever the seconds are and multiply it by 1, which is going to give you the same value, and output that. You want to speed it up, you'll increase this number. So if you multiply this by 2, it's going to take and just basically double the speed of change over the of the turbulence field. Okay, so you can either slow it down, you go to 0.5, it'll make it half as fast, and so on. So you can use that as a sort of control method if things aren't changing fast enough. You just come in here and just change this value. Okay, so we're going to basically take that, and that's going to cause this to change over time. Now, the magnitude, right, you can start by adjusting values here, and also in the turbulence field, right, there's a frequency. So we can, I don't know, let's try 0.5 for right now, and the change rate is how fast, right? Again, you can always go into the info in any node and find out exactly what that's causing. Right, or I should say what each of those values do. So for right now, we're going to leave it at that. Then the other thing I want to do is do a vorticity influence. Okay, that's just going to again alter how that dust is. You create little vortices in the dust. Usually this is more for smoke, but I'm going to try it out. If it doesn't work, you can always get rid of it. And I could plug this directly into influences, but I'm actually going to run it through here so that these sort of blend together before they go in. And to sort of control this one, I'm going to do a modulate. That's in caps. Modulate influence. And it modulates the voxel fog density, which is basically the same as fog density in the source air. So right now we have the fog density at about 2.5. I might actually go and set this to maximum. So right in here, basically what this does, you give it a minute of max value. At the max value, it's going to get the full vorticity influence. And then at the min value, it's going to get nothing. So you just need to tell it what fog density values you want it to work on it, and what fog density values you don't want it to work on. Because of the vorticity influence, it's going to keep churning and churning and churning, and eventually the smoke just turns into this sort of staticky looking smoke. So I might do, let's try 1 and 1.5. So there's going to be a nice smooth fall off between those. Let's try 2. Okay, and then we can also, if we come up here, tab, and we do VSP, so very source property. And if we look in here, what those do, we can just take any of these. So we're doing a source air. So within source air, you can vary these attributes right here, like fog density, temperature, etc., etc. So we're going to do a little bit of that. That just adds to the simulation. Let me grab all this and just move it back in here. So the first one we're going to do is fog density. So I'm just going to copy this because it has to be spelled perfectly. So I'm going to come in here and we're just going to say vary fog density, and leaves a space in here. Let's go like this, close this. And inside the parameters, I'm going to paste that as well. Okay, so it's going to vary the fog density, and we need a minimum and maximum value. So, we can vary, and this is going to overwrite in the source there, it's going to overwrite this value. So we can go, say, from, I don't know, 1.5 to, I don't know, 3 as a maximum, right? So that it's not always just the same fog density value. And if we hold Alt and drag this over the line, and then click on geometry, it's just going to splice it in there. Okay. Then I'm just going to control C, Control V to copy this. And this one I'm going to do, let's see, what else do we want to do in here? Inherit velocity. So the smoke is going to inherit the velocity of the thing that's emitting it. So if we come in here, and now we're going to set this to inherit velocity. And inside of the node itself, we got to set this to inherit velocity. For whatever reason, when I copy, it leaves a space at the beginning. So I just delete that and hit enter. So we want it to inherit velocity. I'm going to just start at 1 and go to, like, I don't know, 4. That's just going to, and then Alt and drag geometry, it's going to put it in there. Now I'm going to look, do we want to do any more? I think that's good. I think just these two in here should be good. Then the other thing we want to do is actually we want to have a floor so that smoke can actually collide with the floor. Because if you remember in the bullet solver, we're using the Maya ground plane as our floor. Well, that's not going to collide with the Bifrost simulation, right? So what we need to do, I'm just going to make a cube. And I like to use a cube because a cube is a volume and not just a flat plane. So if we go in the polycube here, I'm going to set the height baseline. Right now it's sort of, if I turn my grid back on, all right, it's halfway in the grid. If I set this to a value of 1, I don't know why I got 2 cubes here. So if I set this height baseline to 1, it's going to move the cube down while keeping the pivot point there. So now the pivot point's at the top face. So if I scale this down, it's not going to go up above the floor if I scale it, right? So I can do this and just make this really big. And maybe let's make it longer and just move it over just anywhere where there might be dust. Okay, and just sort of delete history, freeze transformations. Call this floor. And what we're going to do is just middle mouse drag that into our simulation here. There it is. And we're going to bring it in here, and we're going to use that as a collider. So mesh 2 to geometry in the collider node right here, and let's go into parameters, and we want this detail size to be the same as the other one, so 0.01. And I think let's turn up the friction, right? So let's just go to 1. We'll see if we need to adjust that. I don't need it to be bouncy, so I might just do 0.1 on that. Give it a little bit of roughness. I don't know, somewhere in there. Okay, it's a solid, which is good. Inherit velocity, yes, yes, yes. And that should be good. And what else do we have to do? Let me think here. Yeah, I think that should be about everything that we need for now. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to again run another play blast. and then we'll see what we have. All right, let's see what we get here. So that's pretty good. We can always turn up the quality settings, which obviously will boost the render times, but that's pretty good. That's pretty good what I'm looking for here. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go through the settings, right? Because I did a lot of tweaking and whatnot to get to where I am here. So I'm just going to show you what I did to get to that point. So if I bring back my graph, so this is what my graph is looking like right now. So back here at the set point shape, it seems that the size of the particle affects the amount of dust being emitted. At least it seems that way to me. So I just put a terminal in here just so I can look at the size, and I ended up on a size 0.2. And then I also added a very initial speed just to give them some initial speed while being emitted. And these are my settings right here, 0.5 to 0.3. The very fog density ended up about 1.5 to 3.5. The very inherent velocity between 2 and 6. Okay. And then in the source air, what I did was I turned on use end frame. And what this is going to do, I don't want these to just emit forever, right? If something emits dust, it'll emit dust for a little bit and it'll eventually stop. So around frame 115 is where it stops emitting. And if we look at the video again, you can see that it emits, and then at some point they just kind of stop, right? It stops emitting and then it all dissipates. So that's kind of what I want. You see in the bulk over here, whereas more, it takes longer than some of these smaller pieces, which is good. Okay, so that's what I did to get that, is just turn that up there. Then I gave it an initial speed of 0.5 just to activate this, and then I set this to emit in the Y direction, which is straight up. Okay, and then oh, by the way, my floor, it's still here. I just put a black shader on it so we it wasn't in the way. The black shows the dust better, so I just put a black shader on it. So that's this collider right here, and that's just same settings. Then in the aero solver setting, I ended up coming back up to 0.5 just to get it looking the way I wanted. So that's what I changed there, and I end up setting the style back to smooth. But you can certainly try all of them and see what works best. For me, smooth looked the best, so I went with that. And then, of course, the vorticity influence. I have the vorticity value at 1. It's a pretty low value. I don't want it overdoing it. And then the modulate, I ended up with 1 minimum, 2.5 maximum. And my dissipation level is about at 1.5. Okay. Then we had our turbulence influence. These are the settings for that. I also added a wind influence, which is just some wind going in a direction. And in this case, it was in the negative X direction. And to run that, I did kind of the same thing I did with the turbulence field for the turbulence influence. It should be noted the difference between these two is that the turbulence field outputs a vector value. As you can see down the bottom, it says vector field, whereas the fractal noise field outputs a scalar value. So in the wind, we just need a number for the speed. We don't need a vector, which is 3 values, the X, Y, and Z. Whereas here, the turbulence influence is based on the position. So the X, Y, Z coordinate in the field will sample a different value. Whereas for the wind, it's a scalar value, meaning it's just a number, right? What's the wind speed at any specific point? So that is the difference. And I did the same thing with the time and a multiplier, right, with a value here, and I plugged it into time. And I think I just set the values 3, So those are just the values that seem to look all right with me. So I did that, and then just plug the wind influence into influences. Okay. Then in the Arnold volume, I gave the scatter a little bit of color, a little bit of brownish color. I could probably add a little bit more or just increase the saturation a little bit, right? And you could actually kind of watch it as I do that. So you can see that it goes a long way. So if I increase the saturation a lot, it really turns kind of red. So I can bring it down. Ultimately, you'll never really know what you have until you do some renders, right? What you see in the viewport is it's okay, but you know the final look of it is going to depend on the lighting in the scene and all this. So really, you don't know for sure until you have it rendered. Then what I also did was I just upped the density on the shader. You can see if I go back to 1, right, it becomes a little bit lighter. So this is sort of a density thing that you can increase after the fact. Unlike in the source air, if you increase the fog density, then you have to resimulate to get the new values. But in the shader, this is just a feature of the shader. You can increase that to, if you want more density, like if I go to 3, I can turn it up. But 2 seem to work well for me, so that's what I went with. And that's the settings that I end up getting. Okay, so that is my graph for this particular setup here. Now, what we might want to do here is for this section right up to about here. That is the emitting from your vertex colors. That's this section of it is for that. So we can just basically right click out here and create a compound out of that. So I was going to make a compound here. So inputs the mesh, then it outputs the points that you emit from. So if we double click this, in fact, we can name this, I don't know. You can name what you want. So I usually will do vertex color emit or something like that. Okay, just so you know what it is. Just double click in there, and this is just the setup here. We have the input, which is the mesh, and then it'll output those points you can then emit from. Something that we might want to do here is, so let's see here, we have the right here, set point shape. Okay. You want to give the user an ability to change this to whatever they want. So we can just take shape and just connect it into the input. What that's going to do is it's going to bring it up to this level here, right? If we go back in there. So shape is one that we might want to do that with. And let's see, and default size, right? We might want to do that so that we don't have to actually come into this compound to change these things. We can just change them up at this level. So there's default size right there. Okay, let's see what else we might want to mess with here. And right here, the value, right? If right now we have a value of 1, but if you want something gray, like at a value of 0.5 or whatever, then you should be able to add that value in there. So we're going to do value as well. Okay, now I don't know if these can be reordered. Maybe not. Doesn't really matter. Yeah, and I think that's probably all the ones that we want. If you want to be able to change the type, I guess you could do that. I don't think I'm going to need that. So now when I go in here, you can see that this node has these things that now I can just change them here without having to go into that compound. And what I can also do is group them, right? So we know that the shape and the default size come from the same node, right? So there's the shape and the default size. So if we go back here, we can right click on one of them, add the group, right? And what do we call this? Particle, something like that. And then we can right click on default size and add it to the same particle group. That way now we can close that off. And then we can also group this one to new here. And we can call this vertex color. Okay, so that's part of it. So the value is that vertex color value. So you can do that and just make it work however you want. So that's a good way to sort of consolidate all of that stuff into one node. So now you've got a much cleaner graph. And then if you want to be able to use this later, you can just select it and right click on it and go to publish it, right? You can publish it in your compounds and then hit publish. And I already have one. So if I type VTX and what was it? I call it VTX color points, right? and same deal. Okay. And what? Oh, the property. Yeah. So I forgot to do that. So the property that we're using is the color set 1, or whatever the color set's called. You might want to do that. You might want to just be able to name that. So we can also go in here, and from the get geo color set, we can take property and send it back to the input. And now we have the property right here. So we can, whatever the color set is named, we can just do it right here in this node. It makes life a lot easier. All right, so that is how that's going to work for us here. This one is published. This one isn't. That's why this one has this little icon here. I'm not going to publish this one again because they do the same thing. So now you can just use this without having to build the whole thing from scratch every time. Okay, so that's how you would do that. It's a really useful little tool to have here. So there we go. See you in the next video.